This is the episode where it stopped feeling like entertainment and reading silly stories online. It started feeling like a warning. Like I'd stumbled upon something I wish I never found. But once I did, I couldn't stop digging. I'm Shelby.
And I'm Casey.
And this is Chill Seeker.
Okay, Shelby, you had me terrified last week. I mean, I've had literal nightmares about this, so I don't even want to know what you have in store for me this week, but please tell me what we're going to be covering.
Yeah, too bad. You're coming with me. So last episode, we opened a door. We started with eerie stories of people seeing or hearing someone they know, a sibling, a parent, a partner, but that person wasn't really there. We talked about the doppelganger, the mimic, something that looks or sounds like someone close to you, but isn't. We explored different theories, glitch in the matrix, a spirit echo, something crossing over from another dimension. At first, I thought this would be a one-off episode, a creepy, passing curiosity, but the deeper I went, the darker it got. And now I know this isn't just a surface-level summary. This is a full-blown investigation, a descent.
Ooh, an investigation? A descent?
Yes.
Where are we descending to?
You'll find out, because not all mimics are harmless, and some of them seem like they're hunting. In this episode, we're going to dive into stories that take us out of the house and into the outdoors, and then back in time. We'll hear from people who were lured off trails by voices of loved ones, only to encounter something not quite human. We'll talk about the mimic that almost walked a man off a cliff, the one that sounded like his best friend, the one that moved with a purpose.
What?
And then we'll go back in time, because these encounters aren't new. From Queen Elizabeth I to Abraham Lincoln, we'll look at some of the most well-documented doppelganger sightings in history. Sightings with multiple witnesses and consequences that turned deadly. So buckle up, because this isn't just folklore. Whatever they are, these things are real enough that people have been seeing them and hearing them for centuries. And I think that is reason alone enough to investigate them and see what the hell is going on. Welcome to part 2 of our Mimic series. And if you thought the first episode was unsettling, you have no idea just how deep this goes. So let's start with a quote, a proverb paraphrased and passed down generations by settlers in Appalachia. If you hear your name called in the woods, no, you didn't. Okay, let's go.
Chills. Like, we're only 2 minutes in. Like, what on earth are you gonna terrify me with this week? Like, I'm already looking forward to going and visiting you. And for listeners, Shelby lives in the wilderness, and now I'm a little nervous.
Honestly, this has been haunting me. Like, this whole series, I kept reading stories that remind me so much of where I'm living right now. It's crazy. It actually, like, when I leave my house, I'm like looking out the windows, like, what's out there? Like, something's out there. Okay, we're gonna start with a story. This one was shared by a now deleted account in the Paranormal subreddit, and the user's name is Gabriel. It had happened just the night before he made the post. He was walking home alone after hanging out with some friends. He made it clear he was completely sober, fully alert, and totally in his right mind. Not the type to get spooked easily either. He said, "I've never been afraid to walk alone in the dark. I'm tall, I look intimidating from a distance, and I always carry a pocket knife when I know I'll be out after dark." The walk was familiar, a path he had taken 100 times, cutting past a stretch of woods on the way to his house. I'm picturing a trail that I cut through to my house after coming back from friends' houses, and I feel like we all have a trail like this that we grew up with, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. Anyway, He's walking alone, just like every other night, but that's when he heard it. His mother's voice calling him from inside the woods.
Gabriel, help.
He froze. He turned toward the trees, dark and eerie with no face or figure visible. But her voice kept coming, calling out his name again and again, terrified, frantic.
Mom!
He called back, starting towards the woods without thinking. She must have gotten lost on one of her nightly runs, he thought. Maybe she was hurt. He stepped closer, about to be swallowed into the thicket of trees. And then something clicked. She had just texted him 10 minutes earlier, telling him she was home, asking him to come home so he could watch his sister so that she could go on her nightly run.
What?
She shouldn't be out here. She couldn't be out here. There's no way she could have made it here in under 10 minutes. The voice was still calling, begging him to come, desperation rising with every second. He stopped in his tracks and pulled out his phone and called her, his hands shaking. She picked up immediately.
Are you in the woods?
He asked. Confused, she said,
No.
She was at home with his sister. And the exact second she said those words, the voice stopped. Just silence. I was overcome with a wave of dread and fear that I had never felt before, he said. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't his mom. It wasn't anything human at all. It knew his name, not just his nickname, his full name. And the only person who ever called him Gabriel was his mom. He ran, faster than he'd ever run in his life, sprinting down the road towards his house. When he finally burst through the door, there she was. His real mother sitting calmly on the couch with his sister, just like she said. No tricks, no prank, and no logical explanation. My only question, he wrote, is who was in the woods?
Oh my gosh. I would have to move. Number one, I'm moving. Number two, I'm doing a full-blown investigation of that woods. Like, I'm going in the woods. I'm bringing a search party with me. We are figuring out where this voice came from. Like, I'm sorry, but I would have to get down to the bottom of it. Like, I'd be calling you, Shelby, and we would get together, all of our friends and family, to go figure out what the is in that forest. Like,
right? I know. I would be too. I mean, I would definitely want to investigate, but I'd also be terrified to ever go back there alone. Like,
yeah,
that is so
never.
scary.
In fact, I would never go anywhere alone after that. Like, that. Like, I'm gonna need a bodyguard at all times.
Yeah. Okay, so Casey, I have a question for you. If he had gone into the woods, what do you think would have been there? Like, what do you think he would have found?
I think what he would have found would be something sinister. I think either like an evil spirit luring him to his death. I don't know. I'm imagining just like something evil. Like, either an evil spirit just went inside of a tree. I'm imagining just an evil tree, just like trying to kill him with its limbs. I don't know, just something dark. It just doesn't feel good. What do you think?
Yeah, so do you think that it would have looked like his mom? Ooh. That's like a question that comes to mind for me, because obviously we've seen the other doppelganger accounts where it actually did look like the family member, but like this one's different. It's in the woods. Like, you know what I mean? Do you think it was just mimicking the voice, or would it have appeared to also be his mom?
Initially, I was just thinking the voice, but then you bring up this, and I think about last week's episode where there were physical doppelgangers that looked exactly like them. Oh my God, how terrifying would that have been had he gone into the woods and seen a figure that looked like his mom that was calling for his help? Oh my goodness. That is like the scariest shit ever. What?
100%. I mean, okay, so I don't know what it is. This is why I went in a deep investigation, and we're going to talk about like all the different possibilities. But I also love how last episode I presented you with all these different theories on what it could be, like an echo, a glitch in the matrix, a time slip. And you're like, it's an evil spirit, period, done. That's what it is.
Period. That is what it is. I still stand by that. It is an evil spirit, because no good spirit is trying to mimic someone else. They're going to be love and light. They're not going to try to morph into someone else and be shape-shifting. That's some devil shit, okay?
I feel that. Okay, and like you're gonna love where this whole series goes because we're gonna get into different creatures and entities that we think it might be, especially next episode. But for now, we're gonna tell another story. And this next story might give us some ideas about what Gabriel would have found if he had wandered into the woods. Okay, so this one comes from Reddit user Girthquake2654. And it's a bit longer, but it's one of the most chilling. Yes.
Shout out my homie Girthquake!
Right? I knew you'd love that. Okay. This is one of the most chilling mimicry encounters I've ever read. Let's call him Quake for short because Girth is just wrong.
I kind of want to call him Girth.
You want to call him Girth?
You call him Quake.
Okay. So, at the time, he was living in a remote national park in West Texas. His job was at a mountaintop restaurant, a 15-minute hike up a winding trail from the staff housing below. He always closed late, meaning that most nights he made the hike down all by himself. No lights, no company, just the deep, endless dark of the desert, under an inky blanket of stars. There was no moon and the trail was pitch black. Most nights it was uneventful. Quiet, still. Until this night, when something was waiting. He rounded the final bend toward the shortcut he always took, a narrow path through dense cactus and brush, when he heard it. His best friend and roommate's voice, who lived there in the staff housing with him, clear as day. He said my name, and when I turned, said it again, he remembered. At first, it sounded normal, familiar. But then something shifted in his gut. The voice sounded both close and far away at the same time.
Oh.
Like someone recorded his voice from a distance and then played it back right next to me. Weird.
That's bizarre and very specific.
I know. Still, he started to step forward, thinking that he had intercepted his friend on a nighttime walk, which wouldn't have been too unusual. He turned, ready to walk off the trail and into the trees. And that's when the real voice, the real friend, called out to him from below on his porch.
Hey, who are you talking to?
Quake, or Girth, froze. And in that moment of hesitation, he saw it. Something burst out of the thicket, out of the exact spot he would have walked into if he had taken one more step.
Wait, what?
It was humanoid, but wrong. At least 8 feet tall.
What?
Yeah, just wait. The description is insane. At least 8 feet tall and grotesquely thin. Almost skeletal, hunched forward as it ran, never fully upright. And its skin gave off a sickly green-yellow glow, kind of like a glow stick.
What?
Yeah, he said he thought it might have been reflecting the light from the porch, but it seemed like it was had its own luminescence.
Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
like a dying glow stick.
What?
He stood there, frozen, watching it bolt away through the desert. Moving with purpose and intelligence, like a human that knew it had been caught. He said this wasn't instinct. It didn't seem like an animal that was fleeing danger. He said it felt like spooking a person hiding in the bushes, like it knew exactly what it was doing. And had he followed that voice, he would have vanished into the trees, completely out of sight, and straight toward a cliff that dropped 6,000 feet into the desert below. The perfect place to make someone disappear. When he finally made it back to the porch, he was shaking. His friend met him at the door, confused, staring into the dark behind him.
Who are you with?
He asked Quake, because from his perspective, it hadn't been just one voice, let alone his own voice. He had heard a group. He said he had heard at least 3 other voices alongside Quake's, laughing, talking, growing closer and closer as they walked down the trail. He thought that Quake had intercepted a troop of hikers, which would have been weird considering the time, but not entirely unlikely because this place was super popular for tourism. But Quake had been alone. Completely and terrifyingly alone. And he hadn't said a word to anyone the entire walk up until he reached the porch in a panic. And whatever had been calling to him wasn't human. Not even close. Quake was terrified, just shouting to his roommate about the thing, barely able to get out a coherent sentence. But the one thing he knows is that he knows what he saw.
What he saw kind of makes me think of like stories I've heard about Slender Man, like the way you described this being.
Yeah, so we're gonna get into what different creatures this might be. That's coming, okay? So right now I just want you to, first of all, remember the description of this being, and then second of all, remember this weird effect where, Quake heard one thing, he heard his roommate's voice, but then his roommate heard multiple voices and Quake's voice, even though neither of them had been talking. So like that weird effect doesn't make any sense to me, but we're going to revisit it in future episodes.
Wow, yeah, that's a really good point that makes this story different from the other ones you've already talked about is, the fact that the roommate was hearing different people. Like, what is that about?
I know. Yeah, it's definitely not the last time this effect will show up. So we're going to try to figure out what it might be.
Satan is doing double time.
So obviously, this is a whole new kind of scary, right? We've added monsters into this horrible little equation. But honestly, to me, it's not just the monster itself that is so freaking scary. It's somehow so much worse when it's a monster pretending to be a human. So why is that? Why does something inhuman pretending to be human cut through you in a way that no ordinary ghost or monster story ever could? It's because mimicry, especially imperfect mimicry, disturbs something ancient in us, something primal. Psychologists call it the uncanny valley. Casey, have you heard of this before?
I've heard of the term, but I don't really know what it means.
That's probably true of a lot of people listening. It was first coined in 1970 by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori. He was researching human emotional responses to robots, and what he found was strange. As a robot became more human-like in appearance, people felt more and more connected to it, up to a point. Then, suddenly, their comfort level dropped off a cliff. If the robot looked too human, but not quite right, the reaction wasn't warmth. It was revulsion, fear, a deep gut-level wrongness. That eerie dip in the emotional response curve is called the uncanny valley. Famous and controversial psychologist Sigmund Freud even touched on this in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, The Uncanny. He argued that the most disturbing experiences aren't the totally unfamiliar ones. It's when something familiar becomes subtly, horrifyingly wrong. In Masahiro Mori's original paper, titled Bukimi no Tani Gensho, or The Uncanny Valley in English, he theorized that this reaction might be tied to our evolutionary past, that humans evolved to detect the presence of death, disease, or deception. A face that's almost human might remind us of a corpse, or something pretending to be alive, something pretending to be us. Sound familiar? And this is why mimic stories hit differently, why they stick with you. Because there's nothing more terrifying than something that sounds human or looks human but isn't.
Oh my god.
And this is exactly why Quake's story is so disturbing. Because what he saw wasn't just something weird in the dark. It was something that was close to human, humanoid, and knew how to say his name just well enough to fool him when he was caught off guard.
Okay, this is what I want to know. Did he call him Girthquake? Or what was the name he was calling him?
We don't know. I don't think we'll ever know that for purposes of anonymity. You know, when he posted this, he did not share his real name, but that would be pretty funny to imagine. Okay. After I read that encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started digging through theories, lore, obscure Reddit threads, anthropology journals. Because if this thing wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't a ghost, then what was it?
A demon.
I know what you think it is, but like, what even is a demon? See, that's what I want to get to the bottom of here, right? Like, let's say it's an evil spirit, but what kind of evil spirit? Is it the same everywhere or specific to a region? You know, like, this is what we're going for. I want to get to the bottom of it. All right, so Quake's story was titled Undefined Humanoid Mimic Encounter in Big Bend National Park, and the comment section was poppin'. Everyone was trying to figure out what the hell this thing was. And 3 names kept coming up again and again. Wendigo, skinwalker, and crawler. Naturally, I got obsessed. Obsessed with trying to figure out what these things are, how to tell the difference, and if any of them are even really real at all. This next episode is where I share my findings. We'll get into the specifics of both Wendigos and skinwalkers, and eventually crawlers. I had so much fun looking up stories about these things and giving myself so many chills. The sheer amount of encounter stories there are out there blew my mind. I cannot wait to get into a deep dive on this very soon. But anyway, let's get back to our main mimic discussion. So, these last stories remind me of something. They remind me of hunters who venture into the woods with elk bugles or duck calls to attract their prey. It reminds me of a fishing lure that pretends to be a shiny fish. What if these things are hunting us when we venture into the woods? They want to capture our attention and attract us. Just like a hunter who would grab two horns and wrestle them together to make it sound like two deer fighting and bring others running. What if this bait is meant to confuse us and draw us near? But I also kind of feel like these outdoor encounters are something different than the urban or ones that happen in houses that we covered last episode. They have such a vibe to them, and I don't know if it can be explained by the same phenomenon. Like, I don't think that all of the earlier stories, or that all mimic encounters in general, are caused by creepy, crawly, Slenderman-esque beings hiding in the woods, right? I mean, what do you think, Casey?
Yeah, it does seem like an entirely different, like similar, but super different in the way that they're manifesting.
That just, it makes me think that they're not all the same thing. But we'll come back to this question throughout this series because, again, it's like we're going to look at all these different encounters and then try to figure out, what are they? Are they all the same thing? Are they all different? Like, how many of these things are out there mimicking human voices? Okay, so every story I've shared so far has been modern and also just anecdotal. No documented witnesses or investigation. No involvement of a famous person. But I do believe that these stories are preceded by many, many ancestors. These stories have been being told since humans became humans, and if they had the internet back then, you can't tell me that they wouldn't have been posting them, writing them down, and trying to share them. I think it's important to remember that on the internet, we are only getting a very tiny snapshot in time of all that humanity has ever experienced for thousands and thousands of years. If we want to go back further, we have to take a look at folklore, legends, and the few well-documented encounters that were only written down and preserved because they involved someone famous, or became famous because of how many witnesses there were. So, as I tell you the following stories, keep in mind that while these are the ones that survived, countless were lost to the sands of time, of ordinary people having these encounters, many of whom would surely have shared and preserved them if they could have. The first chilling account takes us back to 1603 to the bedroom of Queen Elizabeth I. According to multiple historical sources, including famed writer William Lilly, who chronicled the story in Monarchy or No Monarchy, Elizabeth reportedly saw a vision of herself lying pale and still on her own bed. Not just a reflection, a duplicate, lifeless like a corpse. At the time, seeing one's own double was considered a dire omen, a sign of death. And sure enough, not long after this encounter, Elizabeth did die. The vision was so deeply unsettling and widely repeated that it became part of Elizabethan folklore, reinforcing the warning, if you ever see yourself, your days may be numbered.
Okay, but what are you supposed to do if you do see yourself? You're just
fucked.
Dope, dope, dope.
Well, wait, the rest of these stories might give you an indication. And it doesn't always happen like that. Queen Elizabeth was far from the only notable historical figure haunted by her own reflection. Next, we'll move forward 2 centuries to one of the greatest poets of the Romantic era, Percy Shelley, husband of Frankenstein author Mary Shelley. In the months before his death, Percy began reporting seeing visions of his own double. In one encounter, he saw himself standing silently on a terrace, watching him. He also dreamed of a flood overtaking the house and drowning him. Then, in July of 1822, Percy died when his boat sank off the coast of Italy in a storm.
Oh my God, so he literally predicted how he was going to die.
Yeah, this was exactly the kind of death that he had seen in his dreams.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And these weren't rumors. Mary Shelley herself documented the experiences in her personal letters and journals. later published and preserved in biographies and archives, and in them she wrote of her husband's tremendous fear of his doppelganger that he saw multiple times leading up to his death. She firmly believed that these visions were a ghostly warning of a fate he had failed to escape.
Oh my God, imagine how many people have died that were seeing their doppelganger and just didn't say anything because they didn't want to come across as crazy.
I mean, we'll never know. And I mean, even if they had told someone, this is the point I was making earlier about like the internet, like now you can share these stories widely, but think about it, a couple hundred years ago, even 100 years ago, it's like somebody may have seen their doppelganger. Maybe they told their wife, their husband, their son, you know, who knows, but who would pass it down? Like that story is just going to die with them. So, I mean, this has been happening, I believe, for many, many centuries and to many, many people that we don't know about. Just a guess, a gut feeling, right?
For sure.
But not every doppelganger signals death. Some just appear again and again. This takes us now to perhaps the most compelling case of them all. The one that leaves the least room for doubt. The case of Emily Seguí. In 1845, Emily was a 32-year-old French school teacher working at the Pensionnat von Nieuweke, an elite girls' boarding school in what is now Latvia. Described as fair-haired, blue-eyed, and of a gentle disposition, she quickly became the subject of unsettling rumors. What happened there was recorded by American paranormal researcher Robert Dale Owen in his 1860 book, Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World, based on many direct interviews with former students, including Julie de Guldenstube, a member of one of the region's most respected aristocratic families. The reports are wild and terrifying. While teaching at the blackboard, Emily's students began to see two of her. Her doppelganger would appear beside her, mimicking her movements, writing on the board, but with no chalk.
What?
This would happen again and again and again. In one specific incident, during an embroidery lesson with 42 students, the supervising teacher momentarily left the room. Shortly after, Emily's double appeared seated in the teacher's chair at the front of the classroom. At the exact same time, students could see her out through the big windows in the classroom picking flowers outside, the real Emily.
What?
Yeah, 42 of them.
And they didn't do anything about it? They all just sat there in disbelief or what?
No, so actually a few students tried to approach it, the doppelganger. One girl even reached out to touch it and described the feeling as putting her hand through cobwebs.
What?
Yeah, and another said it felt like static electricity. The air itself seemed charged. These weren't the claims of one frightened child. This was an entire classroom of 42 students who saw this happening, dozens of witnesses all describing the exact same thing. The encounters happened so frequently that parents began pulling their daughters from the school. Despite having no control over the events, Emily was let go from her position.
Gosh, poor Emily. But also, like, I'm wondering, was the mimic talking? Was the mimic grading papers? Was the mimic likable? Like, did the mimic give better grades than Emily? Like, what was happening?
Then they probably would have liked her. Yeah, no, as far as I know, she was just appearing, doing kind of like hollow movements, not interacting with them. She seemed like a lifeless version of the real Emily. So like she'd show up next to her drawing on the chalkboard, but with no chalk. She would just sit in the chair. She would stand behind her, but she wasn't really like talking to or interacting with the students. So, Robert Dale Owen didn't report this lightly. His documentation included names, dates, and personal testimony from members of the nobility who vouched for the truth of this story. It's one of the most credible and thoroughly recorded doppelganger cases in history. Not a rumor, but a collective experience. I mean, it literally became such a huge problem that she was fired over it. I think even our most skeptical listeners will have a hard time completely dismissing this case.
How can you possibly deny it when there's 42 witnesses? Like, this is definitely the most credible one so far.
Yeah. I mean, you can say anything is made up, as we know, right? Like, we've talked about this in past episodes, even in my whole MH370 series, where people will always show up to call something fake, no matter how good the evidence is or how many people say that they witnessed it.
Totally. I mean, we've both experienced it in our own lives, where people are saying something is fake when we know for a fact that it's real. So yeah, there will always be skeptics no matter what.
Yeah, but I think this one is a pretty good case for at least the fact that doppelgangers do exist, they do show up, and people do experience them. Again, whatever the source might be. But our investigation isn't over yet. Now, we fast forward again to June 22nd, 1893. Sir George Tryon, a high-ranking British naval officer, was aboard the HMS Victoria off the coast of Syria when he made a catastrophic miscalculation, ordering a maneuver that caused a collision and sank the ship. He went down with it. But at that exact moment, nearly 2,000 miles away in London at a party, guests at his home who were attending it saw him.
What?
Yeah, multiple people, including respected members of the British military and society, swear that they saw it. Sir George walked straight through the drawing room, dressed in full uniform without saying a word. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He just walked through and then vanished.
What?
The news of the sighting at the party and his death reached the press around the same time, giving the event an eerie synchronicity. Witnesses went on record. Their testimonies were published in The Times and other newspapers of the day. Was it a mass hallucination? A morbid prank where everyone at the party decided to lie for some unknown reason? Or had Sir George's spirit arrived home just before the news of his death? What do you think?
I tend to think the last one. So I feel like I've read stories or watched some YouTube videos about loved ones saying that they saw the person like right before they died or right before they got news that the person had passed away. So in this specific case, I tend to think maybe his spirit went back to see his family and friends one last time, and maybe they did see a version of him and his spirit.
Okay. So you feel like this one's actually him where the other ones don't seem to have been?
I tend to think that this one could have been him just because he actually died and it happened like right when he died. But I could totally be wrong.
I mean, who knows, right? But I have seen a lot of encounters and read and watched things about people experiencing exactly what you just said, like a loved one showing up to them, appearing to them, and then they find out that at that exact moment or just before that, the person had died. So that seems like more of a case of like a ghost type situation rather than maybe the same type of mimic or doppelganger encounter as the other ones we've discussed. But again, it's like, this is what we're trying to figure out, right? Like, what are these all different encounters? Are they the same thing? Are they different? I don't know. But he's not the only world leader with a ghost story. In fact, he's not even close to the most famous one. Casey, can you guess what I'm going to say next?
Abraham Lincoln?
Yes. He keeps coming up.
My boy, Abe.
Okay. So, shortly after his first election in 1860, Lincoln stood in front of a mirror in his Springfield home and saw two versions of himself reflected back. The second face was pale, translucent like a ghost. It looked deathly. According to Mary Todd Lincoln, who was deeply spiritual and kept detailed notes of her husband's experiences, the sighting disturbed them both. She believed it was a supernatural omen indicating that he would indeed win a second term, but would not survive it. And she was right. After his assassination in 1865, the story of Lincoln's double vision was shared publicly by Noah Brooks, a journalist and close friend of the president, in his memoir Washington and Lincoln's Time, a very credible source still referenced by historians today. Some skeptics chalk it up to stress or an optical illusion. But even now, the account lingers, part of America's strangest presidential lore. Because Lincoln didn't just see his double, he saw his own death. Okay, let's just try to unpack this for a minute. All these encounters, not whispers, not rumors, not one person's foggy memory. There were multiple witnesses, first-hand journals, newspaper reports, and historical records, all describing the same phenomenon. A perfect copy of someone appearing unexpected, unwanted, and unnatural. Sometimes these copies seem to be omens of impending death, But in one of our most witnessed and well-documented cases, that of Emily Segee, it seemed to not really be an omen of anything at all, except like her getting fired, right? I mean, she didn't die, at least not immediately after this happened. In fact, we don't really know what became of her at all. She disappeared from the public record, but not in a tragic or documented way, which raises an eerie question. If her double wasn't a death omen, then what was it? We're left wondering, were any of these doubles messengers of death? Were they just glitches in time or something else entirely? Because the deeper you look, the less they all seem to follow one clear rule. Which brings me to something that I've been dying to ask you. In this episode and the last, we've gone over many historical and modern accounts of doppelgangers and mimics. So now that I've gone over these historical ones, I want to ask you again, Casey, what do you think these are and what do they mean? So, we know that these don't seem like they're all the same phenomenon. But why do you think they're so different and what do you think each is?
Gosh, it's really hard to say. I mean, I definitely think there's different things going on, even if they have very similar characteristics. Because I venture to think that a lot of these are really evil, but in the story of the teacher, like that mimic didn't really come across as evil, but still just bizarre. Also, kind of
creepy.
An evil bitch for getting her fired. Like, that wasn't cool. but then the guy who ended up dying and then his friends and family see him at the party, like that one didn't really feel evil to me either. So it's really hard to say what I think these could be or what they mean, or maybe they just, I mean, maybe it's similar to the alien thing where some of them are good, some of them are bad. So maybe it's the same thing with mimics. Maybe some of them are good and maybe some are evil.
I mean, at this point, I'm getting the vibe that like some of them might just be a glitch or like a time slip of some kind, or even just like an echo where it's like it's not really an entity or a being or a spirit at all. It's just like an echo of a person, right? Like the Vodagar idea. But then for other ones, it seems like either a ghost, like the person's spirit themselves, or like it's something super fucking evil, like that humanoid thing in the woods, right? I mean, these are all different. I feel like they're all different, which is crazy.
Totally. I mean, it's just like the amount of time I could spend deep diving on all of these stories because this is so fascinating.
Well, we're going to deep dive on it because the more I looked into it, the more stories I read, I stopped thinking that these were all the same thing, as we know, right? They just seem so different. Because if these doppelgangers and mimics aren't all the same, then what are they? Maybe some are just echoes, projections, time glitches, slips, right? But what if some of them are something else entirely? Something ancient, intelligent, and hungry.
Hungry?
Hungry. To try to answer that, we're going deeper into the oldest and darkest stories we could find. We're digging through folklore that lasted many, many generations. Not just because it was interesting, but because it was meant to keep you alive. In part 3, we're pulling back the curtain further than ever before and looking at the most infamous beings known for imitating us: Wendigos, skinwalkers, and the thing that might be behind so many modern day encounters: crawlers. These aren't just tales told around the fire for fun. They are warnings stitched into the myths and survival instincts of cultures around the world. And once you hear some of the eyewitness accounts tied to these entities, you might think twice the next time someone calls your name from the trees. Because maybe not everything that looks or sounds human is.
Oh my God. It's a good thing I have bad hearing because I probably wouldn't even hear if they were trying to call my name. I would be like, just continuing on because I have terrible hearing. So I guess that's a blessing in disguise. Unless they're doing some telepathically, then I'm fucked.
That's what I was gonna say, because I mean, look at the story with Quake or Girth, right? Like, it seemed almost telepathic because they were hearing such different things, and we're gonna revisit that idea because it's not the only account, and that honestly is such a terrifying possibility to me. Like the fact that it could be actually in your brain and not just, an audio sound recording. Like, that is just crazy to me. Yeah, I want to keep these things out of my head, please. But
yes,
I'm just saying your bad hearing might not save you.
Oh my gosh. Also, I'm wondering, like, if these stories were told to save people, like, what's the protocol when it happens? Like, when you do see a double of yourself, like, and now you have impending doom? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, the main lore seems to indicate that if you hear or see something in the woods, like in the outdoors, you just shouldn't follow it. But we're going to get into that all next episode.
Like, I want to meet the person who does follow it. Like, what the
Well, but what
fuck
if
are you
it sounds
thinking?
what if it sounds like your kid? What if it sounds like your best friend? You actually think they're out there. Your friend or your family member calling you from the woods isn't necessarily evil. So what if you just think it's them? That's the point, is like, if you hear something calling for you from the woods, don't follow it, even if it sounds like someone you know or love.
Yeah, that is absolutely terrifying.
Right?
Especially when they know stuff that only that person would know. Like the story.
Yeah, like Gabriel, his mom calling for him,
Yes.
and nobody else calls him that. Weird.
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
So I want to hear from you, the listener. What do you think mimics are, and what crazy or terrifying supernatural entity or being should I cover next?
One question I do have for you, Shelby, is do chupacabras fall into this somehow at any point, or no?
Not in this series, but honestly, we could talk about it, because chupacabras, from what I understand, it's more of an animal, not really like a humanoid creature. And they suck the blood from different livestock, right? But as far as I know, I don't think I've heard any chupacabra mimicking encounters. And the series is pretty much focused on mimics specifically, because, like, trust me, there's a ton of cryptids and crazy monsters out there that people believe in all over the United States and world. But for purposes of this series, we're talking about the ones that are known to mimic human voices or faces. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like this video, please, and tell us on patreon.com/chillseeker and social media at chillseekerpodcast on Instagram and at chillseekerpod on TikTok. And leave us a 5-star rating if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Stay tuned and stay safe. We'll see you next time on Chill Seeker.
Don't follow the voice,
Bye.
guys. Bye.